Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is David Novak. I have been reading the Gulag Archipelago by Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn, and today I am going to read a bit of an extended passage from this book. I am in part 3, and this is from a chapter titled The Czechs as a Nation. I had a cat behind the camera there for a second, and he decided he was not interested in pushing on anything. So this will not be an audiobook quality reading. I am going to stumble through it, and I have one part, at least, in which I expect I will interject a personal anecdote. And then when I'm done with the entire passage, I will go on and just make some extemporaneous comments about various things, depending on what my memory can retain of what I hope to say. It's never for sure. You have to know the word Zek, Z-E-K, to get the full meaning out of this passage. And let's just say it refers to a prisoner of the Gulag. Prior to this passage, which I will read, Solzhenitsyn has gone into a bit of the etymology of that phrase. It's not necessary to get the meaning of what I will read. Whoops. A cat tried to jump and the jump did not succeed. Things happen. The Zek is always expecting it to be worse. That is how he lives, constantly awaiting the blows of fate and stings of the evil spirit. And on the other hand, he perceives every temporary relaxation as an oversight, a mistake. In this constant expectation of misfortune, the austere soul of the Zek matures, stoically hardened to its own fate and pitiless toward the fates of others. The Zek's deviations from his state of equilibrium are very minor, either on the dark side or the bright side, either on the side of despair or on the side of happiness. This was felicitously expressed by Taras Shevchenko, who spent a little time on the islands in prehistoric times. Quote, "I now have almost neither grief nor gladness. On the other hand, there is a moral calm like the cold-bloodedness of a fish. Is it possible that constant suffering can rework a human being in this way?" Unquote. Indeed, yes, indeed it can. A stable, indifferent state of mind is the Zek's indispensable defense, so he can survive long years of grim island life. If he does not attain this smoldering, lusterless state of mind in his first year in the archipelago, ordinarily he dies. Once he has attained it, he continues to live. In a word, if you don't kick the bucket, you'll become an adept. All the Zek's feelings are dulled and his nerves coarsened. Having become indifferent to his own grief and to the punishments which the guardians of the tribe have laid upon him, and even by then almost to his whole life, he does not experience any spiritual sympathy for the grief of those around him either. Somebody's outcry of pain or even women's tears barely compel him to turn his head. So dulled have his reactions become. Often the Zeks show no mercy to inexperienced newcomers, and laugh at their errors and misfortunes. But do not judge them severely for this. They are not doing it out of malice. Their sympathies have simply atrophied, and all that remains noticeable to them is the funny side of events. One paragraph to go, but here's where I will make my interjection. Many years ago, I was on a plane flight from hell, or a succession of plane flights actually, from Singapore to Paris, and the plane broke down, I believe, in Delhi, requiring a day spent there, which was interesting. And then I don't believe the plane broke down a second time. I think it had to do with weather complications. So we landed at the wrong airport outside of Moscow, and then we had to take a bus to the other airport in Moscow, and then we were held there for a day in a room where we were fed, and then continued on our flight subsequently. And there was one incident which has stuck in my mind. This was communist Russia. This was the Soviet Union, I should point out. I mean, it's got to be about 40 years ago now, maybe a little less than that. And I forget exactly what juncture, but it probably was when we were exiting the first plane. Now, in a lot of smaller airports around the world, you do not exit the plane via a walkway right into the airport waiting area itself. You go downstairs or steps and hop on a bus. And I don't remember if it was, it couldn't have been that. It must have been, I really, unfortunately time has gone by, but there was, we were probably being held out on the tarmac or whatever then. And then the buses came to carry us to the airport. And it was not a big deal, but I recall there was a Frenchman, and his wife was put on one of the buses, and he was right at the cutoff line, and he wanted either to go with his wife or for his wife to stay behind and go with him. And the Russians, of course, would not tolerate any such thing. They ordered that she go on that bus and that he stay behind, and he freaked out. And the Russians all around, fellow passengers on the plane, they all just laughed at this man who was frantic. And that, I think, instilled in me from that day a bit of a hatred for Russian people. And Solzhenitsyn here says, do not judge them severely for this. So I am glad in this sense to have read this, and I will consider that. I believe he is probably right, although those civilians who were laughing at this Frenchman were not in the Gulag. They were just normal Soviet citizens. I must give them some leeway, understanding that the harsh circumstances of communism itself could be considered a kind of gulag, if you will. So let me read one more paragraph that follows what I just read. The most prevalent world outlook among them is fatalism. This is their profound universal trait. It is to be explained by their dependent situation, their total lack of knowledge of what will happen to them even in the most immediate future, and their actual inability to influence events. Fatalism is even necessary to the Zek because it confirms him in his spiritual stability. The son of Gulag believes that the most tranquil course is to put his faith in fate. The future is a cat in a sack, a pig in a poke, and not understanding it clearly and having no idea what's going to happen to you in the possible variations of life lying ahead. You don't need to strive too insistently for something or reject something too obstinately, be it a transfer to another barracks or brigade or camp. Maybe it will be for the better, maybe for the worse, but you are free of self-reproaches. Let it be worse for you, but it wasn't done by your own hands. And this is how you preserve that precious feeling of dauntlessness, how you save yourself from fussing and ingratiating. And this is just an example of the magnificent insight that I've been finding in the third part. This is volume 2, but volume 2 contains parts 3 and 4, just to be clear about that, of this magnum opus, if you will. And it's brought to mind various thoughts. Now, the sentiment that he describes there is something that I have tried to express in different ways at various times. I think I even tried to say something of that sort in one of the recent sonnets that I wrote, but did not say so well as he did there, and that is the sense that which comes with age, that what you wish for and hope for, you dare not do too strenuously. And I can recall many occasions in my younger days when I was very hopeful for a certain outcome of an event, perhaps a job interview that I was going on or a date. And the experience of time has instilled in me much more of that Stoicism, if you will. But this also has brought into my mind some thoughts about the nature of reading and reading to conclusion. A lot of people on BookTube have been talking recently about the idea of rereading, and there has also been some discussion about not finishing a book that you set out to read. In BookTube lingo, this is called DNF, meaning, I guess, do not finish. So DNFing a book is not finishing a book. And it's something that gets talked about quite a lot in the BookTube sphere. Recently, Brian at Bookish has had some really good things to say about this on his channel, and if I can figure out which video contains his comments, I will put a link to that in the description. Now, unlike Brian and other booktubers, I'm not going to give a long, drawn-out thing. Probably shouldn't say that. That's going to sound insulting, but whatever, let it fly. I'm not going to make apologies for my opinions because your opinions might be different. I understand that your opinions might be different. And if you don't like mine, that is actually fine. I don't want to get into a debate about it, but I tend to just speak fairly carelessly, and I'm not going to worry about it. I understand that everybody has different opinions. Now, in the case of Brian at Bookish's opinions, I tend to be pretty much in accord most of the time. But I'm not going to talk about his opinions. I'm going to talk about mine. And please do not conflate anything I say with anything he has said. So, for the last year and a half, more than a year and a half, I have been making it my purpose to read more than I ever have in life, to read one book, set it down and pick up the next book, and just proceed. And so I have read more than I ever have. And one of the things that I have been trying to do has been not DNFing a book. So I guess when you say not DNFing, now I'm getting confused myself. Is that a double negative? Well, I'm trying to finish everything I start. Let me just try to speak in regular English without the booktube lingo. I'm trying to finish what I read. And Brian himself has made a good case that there's a lot of good reasons to try to do that if you can. Now, he recently DNF'd the first part of Don Quixote and is very pleased with his decision, and I salute him for that and laud him for that, and I laud any of you who does not finish a book and is happy with that decision. Before a year and a half ago, not finishing books was my standard practice, if you will. But that said, I am very pleased now that I have become a reader to finish what I have started. And I have not hit a book that has been so awful that I just had to throw it against the wall or whatever. Of all the books that I have read since a year and a half ago, only one was that bad where it was DNF worthy, to be sure, and that was the one by Jean Lartigue, The Centurions, I think, a Penguin classic, if you will, but far from being a classic. It was a book that was not only about racist characters, but the book itself was racist. And then the execution of the story was fairly clumsy to boot. So it was a hugely cringe-worthy book. And nevertheless, I progressed through the entire narrative and finished the book. Unfortunately, I had bought a sequel to that book, and I will not be reading that sequel. But I want to state unequivocally that it has been my experience that I have never regretted having read something. And I think that's an important realization. A book like this, if you check back to my earlier videos, I've been on this for a long time, you'll see that I really had a hard slog of probably the first 400, if not 500 pages, through at least 4/5 of volume 1, which contained parts 1 and 2. It was rough going for me. And part of that is because I had expected it would be a novel, and it turned out it's sort of a piece of journalism, but really without any rigorous journalistic standards, though I believe Solzhenitsyn held himself to rigorous standards of truth-telling, which may even be more important, to be honest. But it was very hard reading. And now that I've gotten into the third part, there's been just chapter after chapter of description of the life in the Gulag, taking various facets. And there has been a lot of very illuminating commentary by the author. And so I have to say that sometimes it really is worth your while to push yourself through something. It's still not the most easy read for me, and it's not even initially something I particularly wanted to read. I don't really want to know much about the Soviet Union. I mean, now that I am learning it, I'm glad to have it, however. But I could see myself preferring to have entered into some other subject area. But as I say, having read it, it is not a waste. There is no regret at what I have read so far. And I do believe that's important. I mean, it has really helped me to interpret an event from my own past 40 years ago. And hopefully helping to loosen up a long-standing prejudice which I have harbored. So that is a positive outcome. The Soviet Union was an important backdrop to the world in which I was born and raised. Whether it will remain so in the future, whether this book will retain its importance to the future, is anybody's guess. The climate may collapse and we all may be done for sooner than we think. We just cannot predict. And there's no way to say that I should have been reading book X instead of book Y. You really, as you get older, you tend to think about opportunity cost a lot more. But in the end, you only have the present moment. And this is where I am at the present, and I am finding it good. So I will leave it at that. Thank you for listening if you've made it this far.